Ottawa, Waterloo, Hamilton, cities across the province have been grappling with what to do about the private vehicle service UberX. Ontario's capital city saw hundreds of taxi drivers flood City Hall this week to voice their belief that not only is Uber breaking the law, but it's also putting passengers and other drivers at risk. Here now with their views, Sam Moini. He is spokesperson for the Toronto Taxi Association. And Jonathan Kay is here. He's editor of the Walrus magazine, author of the column Uber versus Taxi, which was in the September issue of that same magazine. It's good to have both of you here. We invited somebody from Uber themselves to be with us, and they declined our invitation. John, I suspect there's still lots of people out there who don't know what Uber is because they haven't used it. So tell us, what is it?
Well, Uber is, it styles itself as a technology company, which of course it is. Some people would argue that it's actually a brokerage, which acts as a taxi service. You install the Uber app on your smartphone, and you give it your credit card information, and then you essentially hail an Uber vehicle, which comes to pick you up and delivers you to where you want to go, just like a taxi. The difference being that in the case of the UberX service, which is by far the most popular service, it's not an actual taxi driver. It's someone like you and me who is moonlighting as a driver. It tends to be cheaper than regulated taxi services, and it's become extremely popular for that reason.
And no money changes hands, right?
It's all done electronically. It's actually one of the aspects that people like about Uber, is that once you give it the credit card information, you don't have any kind of awkwardness at the end in terms of tipping or taking bills out or having to go to an ATM or whatnot. In fact, if you want, there's no communication between you and the driver because everything is mediated through your smartphone, including what your destination is.
And you did it.
I drove for UberX, yes.
You took the course,
Yeah, so for the Walrus cover story that you mentioned, I drove for UberX for a little. I don't want to overstate it. I did it for a couple of days. And then I took the City of Toronto taxi driver course, or 2 weeks of it anyway. And I compared the experience, because basically I wanted to answer the question, what happens if Uber kills the regulated taxi industry? A lot of people would be okay with that. In my mind, they were kind of being very blithe about it. They were saying, oh, you know, this is cheaper, this is better, this is easier. I wanted to say, okay, let's actually check out if they are perfect substitutes. And so I took the course to figure out what taxi drivers, what kind of instruction they get, what kind of special skills they have that UberX drivers don't.
And we'll go into more detail throughout our conversation. Sam, what's the difference between your regulated taxi industry and Uber?
Very simple. One's legal, one's illegal.
Well, is Uber illegal?
Absolutely. UberX drivers are breaking the law every day. They're inadequately insured. They're breaking the city bylaws, the municipal bylaws.
We should say, for the record, you say it's illegal.
There's been charges laid.
One court has already made a ruling that it's okay.
Well, the court ruling was whether they're a brokerage or not. It wasn't the actual people who were driving for UberX. The people who are driving for UberX are doing so illegally, and there's over 150 charges laid against them by the city, by municipal licensing and standards.
In your view, what makes it illegal?
Well, they're not licensed, first of all. They don't have the inspections. They don't have the insurance. They're driving people around for a profit without being licensed. That's illegal. If you do that, you have to have a taxi license to do so. And that's why they're being charged today.
Let's just understand the insurance angle, because of course everybody in the province of Ontario who drives a vehicle is insured. So these people are insured. So what's your problem? What's your concern about the issue of insurance?
Well, insurance, they have private insurance. And private insurance is for private use. So when you have a vehicle that's driving people around for profit and for commercial purposes, you must have commercial insurance. And this is clearly stated by the Canadian Bureau of, the Insurance Bureau of Canada. They've sent warnings out to UberX drivers. They've told people that you have to be careful with what you're doing. Uber is putting you at risk here. And we saw just a couple of weeks ago that an UberX driver got into an accident and now is suing Uber because their insurance company didn't accept the claim, and they've now banned them from having their insurance because they said, you're a commercial vehicle, we didn't know you're driving for Uber.
If I could just jump in
Please.
here, without commenting on whether it's legal or illegal, I can say that when I did my brief stint as an UberX driver, I was driving under my regular household car insurance thing. I think I paid $1,200 or $1,500 a year like everybody else.
Compared to a taxi's insurance
Well, one guy
cost?
interviewed, it was something like $9,000 a year.
Well, that's significant.
Well,
isn't it?
because think of it, you might have a taxi that's being driven by 3 different guys on 3 different shifts, 24 hours a day. That taxi may go through, what, like 100,000 kilometers a year of driving, and it's a different kind of driving than you or I might drive to work or whatnot. So obviously the rates are going to be much higher. And so in fact, that was one of the biggest complaints from the taxi drivers and the taxi owners I interviewed, because sometimes it's the owners who pay the insurance, and it's this huge disparity in rates.
Sam, you know, or I'm sure you've heard that Uber is, I guess, in discussions with a corporate insurance company right now in order to provide a stepped up, beefed up, higher level of insurance, a more corporate rate of insurance, a professional rate of insurance, I guess, that would cover its drivers. Does that solve that problem for you?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because now that they've announced that they're in talks with an insurance company to create a new type of insurance, what have they been doing all along? They're just admitted right now that they've been operating with no insurance for the last year and a half. And now all of a sudden, because it's coming to council, they want to show the councillors that, oh, we're working on some kind of policy. Nothing is done yet. And so the drivers today are uninsured. So you're putting people at risk today. That's the important thing. This doesn't mean nothing. This is just talk. This doesn't mean that there is a policy being made. This is just something that they say they're working on.
Let's understand, at the end of the day, either this is or is not in the public's interest. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, you've seen this life from both sides now, if I can steal a song title. Do you think Uber's existence is in the public's interest?
Your musical reference was entirely lost on me.
Judy Collins, come on.
Okay, fine. It's interesting you say that, because when I took the City of Toronto taxi course, the phrase public interest was thrown around all the time. We are giving you this license because we believe that it is in the public interest to have a regulated industry. The pedagogy in the course, it's all public interest this, public interest that. It's very high-minded, as are most regulatory regimes in the welfare state. It's about what is in the public interest. And so in my article for Walrus, I actually say, but what is the public interest? If you are working for Uber, your message is the public interest is very simple. Get the most people from A to B at the cheapest possible price. That's the public interest. And they'll say, we do as good or better a job at that as the regulated taxi industry. However, when I took the City of Toronto taxi course, you find it's much more expansive than that. The public interest may include having a car that has disability access, having wheelchair accessibility, even though a very small fraction of your passengers may require that. Public interest may require that you're educated on what you do with a passenger who has dementia, and you're bringing them to an address where there's no one there to receive them properly. Public interest may require that you're educated about what to do when there's children in your car.
So that's way more than A to B.
Well, there's 1,000 things, and as I was taking the course, these are things people don't think about, because if you look at a lot of the pro-Uber columns in the media, they're written by 25-year-old journalists who say, hey, this is fantastic. I took Uber to the baseball game. It was cheap. This is great. Everybody should ride Uber. And it's true. As I say in the article, if you were a 25-year-old going to a concert or a baseball game, you're in the backseat of someone's car. Who cares, like whether the car's yellow or not? However, if you are older, if you have special needs, if you require a car that has any kind of special training or equipment, there is a difference, and that's where the public interest thing comes in.
Let me quote your piece, and then Sam, I'll get you to comment on it. This is from your article in the Walrus. Beyond tourism, licensed drivers are seen as mobile, temporary, social workers, because they're not supposed to discriminate against customers who look impoverished, even if they doubt their ability to pay. UberX drivers, on the other hand, have no public interest mandate. They pick up only those with smartphones and available credit, and they are assisted in discriminating against shady characters through the 5-star rating system. Sam, in your view, how well do taxis fulfill this social responsibility angle that John just talked about?
Well, you know, when you're talking about taxi drivers, as he said, they go through a 19th-day course, and when they have customers in their car, they have an obligation to make sure that they provide the proper service, make sure they go from point A to point B safely without discriminating age, sex, anything. And especially people with disabilities, we just had a review done last year that said in the future we want all of our taxis to become wheelchair accessible. So every single taxi was going to have to become wheelchair accessible. Just think about that. That's a $70,000 vehicle right there for every single taxi in the City of Toronto, while Uber gets to have 10-year-old cars with any 4-door sedans. So they're discriminating against the disabled because, and the seniors as well, because they don't have smartphones. They don't have, older people are not as in tune with apps and whatnot. And so if you don't have a smartphone, you can't access Uber.
I have to ask about the social responsibility angle again, because we saw a very tragic example, and I know there are exceptions to every rule, but there was somebody who went to a concert to see Drake, and after the concert was over, this young person was looking for a taxi. Taxi driver showed up, was told, that's not a big enough fare, I'm not going to take you, and as a result of having been rejected by that, no, let me rephrase. Because the taxi driver did not pick that person up, that person then happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and was killed. How do you enforce the social responsibility angle that taxi drivers are supposed to follow, but as we saw in this case, didn't follow with tragic consequences?
Well, first of all, it was a tragic incident that happened, and the taxi industry was very sympathetic to the families and anybody affected by that situation. But I think it's unfair to blame the taxi industry for that incident. It was the person who shot the person that was to blame. However, we're not saying we're a perfect industry. We still have some flaws that we have to fix. When it comes to short fare refusals, I've been an advocate of making sure that we enforce stricter penalties on drivers who have done that in the past, and we don't want that to occur anymore in the city of Toronto. However, you have to ask a question, why are the drivers doing that right now? You know, right now, I can tell you, because I live it day to day, I see tears in drivers' eyes. They can't make a living anymore. They go 4 or 5 hours without a fare because Uber has come into the market and saturated it and vilified the taxi industry by giving a cheaper service, by cutting our costs. They don't have the overhead we do. So they charge whatever they feel. Even if I wanted to charge less, I couldn't. So it puts the burden on us to basically put the microscope on every flaw that the taxi industry has.
But let me pick out, and first of all, I think I misspoke. I think I said a concert. It was an after party. How is this not equivalent to cars were invented at the beginning of the 20th century and buggy whips and horses and carriages went out of business? There's a new disruptive technology on the market. It's putting pressure on you guys. It's tough for you guys, but that's life. Respond to that argument.
Well, this is not a battle about technology. That's everything that people got to understand is we're not battling Uber's technology. I think the technology is fantastic. Uber's been around for 3-4 years. They were using licensed taxis before. They were only using licensed taxi and licensed limousines, and all of a sudden they introduced this new part of their app called UberX. This is not about technology. Ask yourself a question. What are they using? They're using a vehicle to transport you from point A to point B. What are we doing? We're doing the exact same service.
They figured out a way to do it cheaper.
Well, they're using by breaking the law. They're breaking the law. They're putting insurance risks on people. They don't have inspections on their cars. They don't have licensed drivers. They don't have to go through the 19-day course.
John, as we're understand. As we're seeing, this issue is being framed differently depending on what side of the argument you're on. Having driven a taxi, having taken the Uber business, have you come to any conclusions about whether this is an illegal business that's now with us, or whether this is a disruptive technology that ought to be allowed to do its thing?
Look, I think it's very interesting that you brought up the example of when you know, in the 19th century, it used to be a horse and carriage that would pick you up, and then suddenly it was a car, and all the guys who had the horses, they were out of business. It's not the analogy doesn't quite fit, because despite the transition from horses to cars, society never gave up on the idea that there was a regulated monopoly. The idea was these taxi drivers have to obey by all these laws, but in return we give them a monopoly. And whether it was horse or car, that part never left us. The reason Uber is a little different is it's actually more radical than the transition from horse to car, in the sense we are possibly getting rid of the entire idea of a regulated monopoly. And that's why everyone's paying attention to this fight, because it's a proxy for 100 other fights we're having in society about whether you're going to let peer-to-peer technologies. You know, can I go on Kijiji instead of going to a licensed dentist, go on Kijiji and find out some guy who just says, hey, I'll take your teeth out for 50 bucks. There's a whole bunch of other fields where this debate is going to go on, and this is a proxy for that.
Well, we laugh at that one because that's healthcare, and healthcare is different. Healthcare just is different. This isn't healthcare. This is getting from A to B.
Plumbers, electricians, taxi driver, it's an interesting profession because we don't think of it as a skilled trade, but there are skills that go into it.
Sure.
And so it's kind of on that cusp. But if taxi drivers are allowed to go the way of the buggy whip because we sort of like say, oh, well, this is a technology company. There's a lot of people who are saying, well, what about my job? You know, what will I be the next taxi driver? And that's why people are paying so much attention to it. And that's why at the end of my Walrus article, I say, if you're a city councillor, if you're a mayor in Toronto, you can't just say, well, let's see what the market decides. There's a real policy decision here. I'm not on Uber's side, I'm not on the taxi guy's side. What I do think is you can't be utopian and just say, oh, these folks, they're just going to share the market. They're not going to share the market because Uber has lower cost structure. Eventually, if you do nothing, they're going to win. And you have to ask yourself, are we okay with that? Are we okay with just saying goodbye to the regulated monopoly structure that's been with us since the 19th century?
Have you come to an answer to that question yourself?
Well, my answer would be, if you let Uber win, you're still going to have to find a way to get all those elderly people, the disabled people, the children, the people with dementia, the people with seeing eye dogs. Right now, taxi driver, you can lose your license in the city of Toronto if you do not pick up a blind person who has a dog. You cannot say, oh, I don't like dogs in my car. You will. It is the one thing guaranteed till you'll lose your license. The Uber guy, it's not his problem because the guy may not have a smartphone if he's blind.
Right.
And so you have to say to yourself, in the final analysis, if Uber wins, who's going to be picking up all those people? It'll be taxpayers, because you're going to have to, here in Toronto, we're going to have to expand the Wheel-Trans service to pick up all those people currently relying on cabs. They can't use Uber for whatever reason. So it's going to be eventually the taxpayers who are actually, in a way, subsidizing the 25-year-olds who are getting the cheaper fares on Uber to go to their concerts and their sports events.
Sam, do you think, as Jonathan has pointed out in the last line of his article, is it really a us or them situation? One of us is going to live, one of us is going to die.
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that if Uber is regulated in any way, if UberX is regulated and they allow a transportation network company license to be granted to them, it would be the death of the taxi industry. There's no doubt in my mind. I lived in the taxi industry since I was in diapers. My father was a cab driver. I see my cab drivers every day. I know that it would be the death of the taxi industry. And what does that say about the city of Toronto? We have a regulated, law-abiding taxpayers that are the taxi industry, and you have lawbreakers, a foreign company coming into Canada, breaking every single bylaw, every single highway traffic. Like, they break every form of government, provincial, municipal, federal, and taxes.
And you know what, Sam? People like it.
Yeah, like, you know what?
People like it.
The fact that they like it is because it's cheaper. And you know, if we didn't have to pay insurance costs, if we didn't have to have dedicated years and dedicated vehicles for
it's not just a question of cheap. Sorry to interrupt, but it's not just a question of cheaper. People like that the cars are nicer. They like that the cars are kept cleaner. I mean, you hear all of these criticisms about taxis.
If I could just jump in here, one of the reasons that Uber has done so well in the debate, Uber versus taxis, is that everybody has a horror story about a bad cab. As you say, you know, hygiene issues, they took me on the wrong route. One thing that is great about Uber, and whoever wins this battle, I think the taxi industry will have to steal this, is Uber has great features in terms of customer feedback. I got a terrible Uber ride the other day. The guy was a dangerous driver, 0 stars, and I reported him. And 30 minutes later, Uber, you know, whatever you say about Uber, a guy from Uber emailed me back, thank you for your feedback. We've had similar complaints about this guy. He's out of our network. Huh. When has anyone ever been able to do that with a City of Toronto taxi driver?
Sam?
Well, you know, it's interesting that he says that, because one of the most important things is the City of Toronto licensed taxi drivers. So if they have a valid taxi license, I'm a fleet operator, so I am obligated to give that person a taxi. If I don't give them a taxi, I get trouble for it by the city. The city has a phone number where if you have a complaint regarding a taxi driver, if you have a bad experience, if you are refused, you can call that number and complain to the system.
That's the way the system has been working since 1950. And I did once launch a complaint against a cab driver. The thing took 6 weeks. It was bureaucratic. There were forms to fill up. And what happens at the end? He shows up at the East York Civic Center for a disciplinary hearing. He may get a slap on the wrist. The nice thing, and again, I say this, whoever wins this battle, this is a feature the taxi industry has to steal from Uber. That and the app and all the cashless stuff. This is a wake-up call for the taxi industry.
Absolutely.
Even if you guys win the battle, there's like 5 things you have to say, you know what, we've been a cozy monopoly for a century and a half. This has been a wake-up call. We have to start doing a better job of providing customer service, because 5 years from now, there's going to be another company that threatens our livelihood.
Last word to Sam.
Absolutely. You know, I'll just tell you this right now. The taxi industry is not perfect, and we are looking forward to working with our regulators to make sure our service is done to the top level for the public of Toronto, for the citizens of Toronto. We want to fix the things that you guys are talking about, some issues that we have with drivers. We want stricter enforcement on drivers on bad behavior. We want maybe, you know, if your car is dirty, you should have more stricter punishments. We want to have these things come into our regulatory system. However, we cannot have, by giving Uber a transportation network company license, you're giving them an outrageous advantage. You're giving them a different set of rules than you are to us. What we're asking for in the City of Toronto is to have one set of rules for the same service. We are the same service. There's nothing different about how we transport people. We use a vehicle to transport them from point A to point B.
You think you're going to get it?
I hope so. Well, the committee voted in favor of having one set of regulations. And it doesn't close the door to Uber. Uber can still come in. But they got to follow the same rules as the taxi industry, and that's all we're looking for.
Understood. Thanks for this debate, you two, and the debate shall continue. Sam Moini from the Toronto Taxi Alliance, we're grateful you came in today.
Thank you.
Uber not represented because they chose not to.
About that.
Well, chose not to.
As usual.
Take us up on our invitation. And John Kay, whose piece you can read in the Walrus magazine. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.